Last week, you explored the concepts of unique person in a particular situation with a goal to achieve and the learning that's required to achieve that goal. This week, I'm inviting you to shift your attention to creating a relationship with a coach. And to begin by inquiring, what does it mean to create a relationship? What is a relationship? And so in this video, this introductory video, we'll cover 4 ways of thinking about this so that you're able to consider it from multiple perspectives. First, Leahy and Magerman in this week's readings spoke about relationship as a way of being with another person. This way of being includes being fully present in the moment, cultivating awareness that you are speaking to a particular person, creating space where the person feels both fully supported and yet also challenged, and being able to set aside all judgments and have the person feel fully accepted. Now, there's much more on this way of thinking about relationship in the Leahy and Magerman reading assignment for this week. When Hunt and Weintraub considered the kind of relationship a coach creates, they offered the image of supporting and inhibiting. They contrast values that result in support with those that could lead the client to feeling inhibited. Trust versus mistrust. Seeing mistakes as an opportunity for learning, not blaming. Paying attention to hiring the right person in the first place so that he or she is not set up for failure. A long-term way of thinking about learning. Reward systems that are congruent with the commitment to develop people. And finally, that the person experiences being valued for who he or she is, and not just a thing of instrumental use to the manager. The saying in the corporate world that goes, what have you done for me today? Captures that feeling of being used. Again, I'm not going to repeat here what's already covered in this week's reading assignment, and so be sure to read the assigned section from Hunt and Weintraub. The case of Ellen West is famous in psychotherapy. And now I'd like to read a bit from Leahy 2001. Here is an illustration of the absence of prizing. So granted, this is an extreme case, but Rogers would claim that all categorizing of human beings, even in more subtle ways, mangles the person. In 1958, Rollo May created a symposium at a conference of the American Academy of Psychotherapists. Rogers, another psychologist, 2 psychiatrists, an anthropologist, and a social historian were asked to address the infamous case of Ellen West, one that had been studied for 20 years within psychotherapy. Irvin Yalom, in his introduction to Rogers' book, A Way of Being, said that Rogers spoke as though he knew Ellen West, and as though the tragedy had occurred only yesterday. And this is Rogers speaking. The greatest weakness in her treatment, no one involved related to her as a person. Then comes the comic tragic argument over her diagnosis, of which she was evidently quite aware. Doctors disagree. She's manic depressive. No, she's obsessive compulsive. She's a case of melancholia. No, she's treatable. She's not treatable. Then comes the final incredible decision. She is suicidal, schizophrenic, and hopeless for treatment. Therefore, we will discharge her and let her commit suicide. This was one prediction that was fulfilled. She never experienced what Buber has called healing through meeting. So as we see in this story about Ellen West, rather than prizing the particular person in front of them, these doctors saw Ellen West as a case, an instantiation of a particular disease. She was a label for them. The garden as an image for relationship is a simple but rich way of understanding the kind of relationship a coach must cultivate. So this is Carl Rogers' model for person-centered therapy, which is readily transferable to coaching. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail here since it's covered in this week's readings, but I would like to note that the characteristics, according to Rogers, for an effective psychotherapeutic relationship included these. The client experiences the coach as genuine. What you see is what you get. And that experience itself, without ever the coach saying a word about genuineness, teaches the client the value of being open and transparent. When the client experiences being prized by someone who has no agenda, who's non-possessive, they experience acceptance without having to contribute to someone else's agenda. They're taught to prize themselves and others. And finally, in experiencing empathy from the coach, the client feels understood, heard. And this, again without words, teaches the client to listen to their own experiences and those of others with less judgment. For Buber, the kind of relationship that he advocates is like a true meeting. Let me tell you two short stories. When Buber was a young child, his mother ran off with another man, leaving his father, and of course Buber alone. Now, when he was a teenager, Martin met his mother and experienced no felt sense of connection. So he had missed her for years. This was an incredibly disruptive experience for him. He meets her, and there's nothing there. He labeled this a miss-meeting. And this experience was formative for Buber's understanding of true rather than inauthentic meetings. The second story is about a time early in his life when Buber was engaged in mysticism from the Jewish tradition. One day a knock came on the door while Buber was caught up in mystical prayer. He answered the door and found a young soldier there. Buber met with the guy, the soldier left, and Buber went back to prayer. Well, the soldier went off and was killed in World War I. Buber later became convinced that this soldier had something he needed from Buber, and that Buber was not available, was not there to truly meet him. He wasn't fully present. He was anxious to get back to prayer. After this experience, Buber abandoned mystical pursuits and, quote, hallowed the everyday, close quote, experiences of meeting other people. Buber offered a kind of shorthand for relationships in his famous book, I and Thou. You'll be reading more about Buber's work in next week's reading assignments, but for now I'd like to give you a brief explanation of I-thou versus I-it relationships. In the relationship where I treat another person as an it, I'm interacting with him or her as if he or she were a thing. And the individual is a thing because my interest is in whether or not he or she can be of use to me. In the I-thou relationship, I approach the other as a particular person who is completely different from me, yet someone I must interact with in this moment. A person who is valuable, regardless of what they do or don't do. Now, let me give you a subtle example of how a coach can operate with the client as an it. Now, once upon a time, I was working with a global company that was in a crisis. My role was to be the CEO's organization development consultant. My business partner was his coach. Now, this guy was in a terrible position. His prospects for success were slim. And so one day I asked him, "Do you really want to do this?" He looked at me as if I'd lifted a boulder from his shoulders. He thanked me for acknowledging what I noticed, how this was taking a toll on him, but said yes, that he wanted to continue and would try to turn the organization around. So later in the day, I relayed this experience to my business partner, who became very upset. He has to succeed. He doesn't have a choice. Now, she was a great coach who was really committed to her clients and would do anything for them, and they loved her. But in this instance, I suggested to her that her reaction might have more to do with her needing to be successful as a coach rather than what was in the client's best interest. In the I-thou relationship, the coach pays attention to the relationship with the client. In the I-it relationship, it's all about the coach's ego. Finally, in the I-thou relationship, there's a paradox. The other is completely different from me. I can never fully understand his or her experience. Think about the times when people inappropriately say, "Oh, I know how you feel." So they are completely different from me, yet we share a common humanity. In the I-it relationship, that which is different is dangerous, is a threat to me. So I can pretend there is no difference. Oh, we're all alike, we're all the same. Or I can pretend that we have nothing in common. And in that case, he or she becomes completely other. So you have here four different ways of thinking about relationship. And these different ways of seeing the coaching relationship invite different, if interrelated, behaviors from the coach. Do you interact with your clients based on values that support or inhibit? Are you able to be fully present in the moment with the client? Do you pay attention to the conditions for growth, the relationship itself as soil for nurturing development? And finally, are your encounters with your clients true meetings? Okay, that's enough for now. Download the instructions for this week's experiment, carry it out, and then report back on your experience in discussion part A. Have a good week.